Well, thanks for that introduction, Scott. I'm just waiting for somebody to say out there that they can hear me. Jamie's put hi. Graham's, yeah, well, that's great. Thank you very much for that feedback. So let's have a massive amount of fun and a little bit of learning over the next 45 minutes or so. As Scott quite rightly said, this is the third and final in a series of webinars, a journey really that we've taken over the last 3 weeks now. Let's just have a quick recap on the journey so far. Adaptation in the light of COVID-19. Coaches are great innovators. Coaches are great improvisers. So hopefully what we've done over the last couple of weeks is giving you the confidence to be able to adapt sessions in light of the government restrictions that we're all sort of living by and abiding by. The golden thread of these webinars, and particularly on youth endurance, has been long-term athlete development. Do you remember how we've talked about early versus late specialization, deferred gratification rather than instant gratification? We've spoken about that, haven't we? We've also spoken about how important periodization is, even though that we can't control if and when the current competition or track and field season resumes. We've talked about how important it is to still have a goal in mind and to try and work back from that goal. Also, we've talked about a whole range. We had a bit of a laugh last week, didn't we? We spoke about the kind of green goddesses, the Diana Morans. We spoke about the Joe Wickses. Everybody's a personal trainer during this period. Nothing wrong with keeping fit, but you guys are better than that. You've got to learn how to classify your physical exercises. Remember that pyramid we looked at last week, which looked at the difference between preparatory and developmental exercises and generic exercises and specific exercises. Unless you've got some kind of framework, which I gave you last week, you're not going to be able to periodize. Okay, this week then, we are going to focus. One of the things that Scott and I have been receptive towards is your demand for sessions. Now, I've said explicitly in the past, I'm not going to give you a list of training sessions. There are certain running magazines out there, and I won't mention them, that will give you a nice, neat, handy way to break your 5K PB or something like that. But we're not going to do that because it's not athlete centered. I've said that time and again. But we are going to disaggregate the notion of speed endurance tonight. We are going to talk about modes of session, if not specific sessions. And much of what I say is going to be relevant to post-pubescent young athletes. You're going to think about sessions, speed endurance sessions that will help facilitate getting a PB on the one hand, and we tend to associate even pace running with that. And on the other hand, you're going to talk about sessions, speed endurance, which are going to facilitate championship running, tactical based running. Yeah. And we're going to do that by utilizing a case study. And your homework is to go away and to go back, exactly 40 years now, and to watch the Moscow Olympic 800 meter final. I'm looking or listening for everybody in the thread. Can you remember the Moscow Olympic 800 meter final? It wasn't the Moscow Olympics, it was the Coe-Ovet Olympics. It was the first battle between Sebastian Coe and Steve Ovett. And remember, if you can remember, for those of you that are young enough, Steve Ovett came out on top, not because he was the fastest runner, but because he got his tactics right on that evening. Graham saying Coe blew it. Very harsh there, Graham, but we'll see that. Your homework is to go away and watch that race. And you're going to be coaching a young Sebastian Coe. So I'm going to get you doing 2 group tasks this evening when you go back to coach a teenage, young, developing endurance athlete called Sebastian Coe. Okay, let's think about some core principles which are going to guide the way in which you're going to set a young Sebastian Coe his speed endurance work. And this is based on an interview that I did with Lord Coe last summer. I interviewed him actually on the anniversary of his, remember it was 40 years ago. Last year was 40 years since he had that wonderful period. It was the summer of 1979 when he broke the 800, the 1500 and the mile record all in 41 days, didn't he? So I interviewed him about that anniversary, and he said, yeah, there are some core principles that I'd like to convey coach educationally for coaches. They are as follows. He spoke about sports science being a friend but not a master. He spoke about the importance of quality over quantity, and that was reinforced by his coach and father, Peter. Thirdly, he spoke about a multi-tiered or systematic approach to pacing. And fourthly, he spoke about a progressive approach to his own muscular loading. Let's bring those 4 key principles alive before I set you your first group task. Okay, here's what Lord Coe told me last summer. Sports science should be treated as a friend, not as your master. This is what he said. It doesn't happen overnight. Yeah, long-term athlete development, late specialization again, isn't it? Find yourself a coach, young athletes listening in, and trust in them. Remember that coaching is as much an art as it is a science. By all means, consult scientific tools, but as an athlete, don't allow yourself to become a guinea pig at the expense of a sports scientist. There's a lot to be said for good, intuitive coaching. Now, Coe's own father and coach, Peter, was an engineer by trade, but Coe is still stressing that it's not necessarily a sports science-led approach that will get you results. Don't be afraid to experiment, to tinker, what we would call in coach education circles, guided discovery. And when I was fortunate to interview Dr. Barry Fudge, who has a leading role in British endurance running, as many of you will know, I interviewed Dr. Fudge on the eve of the London Olympics in 2012, and Barry Fudge said, no, it's not people like me that are the innovators, it's your coaches. Your sports scientists really catch up with coaching practice years later and just explain what coaches have been doing for years. So the coaches, people like you out there, are the real innovators, not the sports scientists, not even the coach educators or the theorists. It's people like you playing about, experimenting in a disciplined way. Secondly, quality over quantity. There you can see that, I think that was Sebastian Coe's first world record over 1,500 meters. I believe that that's set in Zurich there. That's his coach and father, Peter, yelling from the inside of the track. Very controversial that was back in 1979 and 1980. Peter Coe said the following: the quality of what you do is much more important than the quantity. Why pound the life out of a young runner when you can develop it with quality? This doesn't mean that Sebastian neglected his aerobic development, because that was achieved as a junior through extensive cross-country running in both training and competition. And when I interviewed Seb himself last year, many of you will know that he's a key advocate for pushing to get cross-country running into the Winter Olympics, if not the Summer Olympics. Why? Because he believes that it's one of the reasons for the decline of British middle distance and endurance running. He spoke about Steve Cram. He spoke about his arch rival, Steve Ovett. He spoke about his own development, both in training and in competition. Cross-country is pivotal, he said. It builds the base of the pyramid, that long-term athlete development pyramid that we spoke about last week. It builds your agility, your balance and coordination, because you're running on an uneven surface. Another famous Peter Coe quote: long, slow distance running creates long, slow runners. If speed is the name of the game, then never get too far away from it. So think about that. It's a challenge to you. How are you working the energy systems of young athletes? We spoke about prepubescent athletes last week having an underdeveloped lactate system, but there's still an opportunity through things like fartlek, through things like alactic strides, to develop other energy systems. Don't turn your young athletes into plodders, is what Peter Coe was saying. Thirdly, a systematic approach to pacing. Seb Coe said the following: don't do anything you can't measure. Now, when he said that, I don't mean that he had a metrics for everything, or everything that he did in a training diary was recorded according to a number. I don't think that's right. I think what he's saying is it's having a reason, a rationale for doing what you're doing. Make every session that you do count. Even your recovery runs, he said. Know why you're doing them. Never just do sessions as junk mileage or fillers. That's what Coe said. Many of you that are familiar with the work of an organisation that's quite close to my heart, the British Milers Club, will recognise the gentleman on the left being given a lifetime award by Lord Coe. His name is Frank Orwell, OBE. Frank passed away in 2012. Some of you will know that Frank founded the British Milers Club way back in 1963 and worked closely with Coe's coach and father Peter. Now, Frank wasn't the only person to come up with a multi-tier or multi-pace system. We're not pushing his system onto your athletes. This happens to be the system, and it was a 5-tier system that Coe used. But you could develop a 3-tier system, a 7-tier system, whatever. But typically, Coe would train around paces to do with the 400, the 800, the 15, and the 3K and the 5K. It would be a 5-tier multi-paced system. And Peter Coe said, why did he follow this particular system? Well, it's designed to prevent developing the kind of athlete that is locked into one pace. It's designed to allow somebody like Seb Coe to develop tactical awareness, to allow for that wonderful kick home, that double kick which won him the 1500 meters in Moscow, if you remember, when he kicked with 200 meters to go, and then Ovett comes to his shoulder, Jürgen Straub is just about to be overtaken, and Coe goes again. That's what multi-tier training will give you. So have a think about the way in which you develop your own multi-pace system with your own athletes. Fourthly and finally, Coe adopted a progressive approach to muscular loading. It wasn't just weight training, as we can see him there. I think he's in the gym at Loughborough University doing that. It wasn't just weight training, but he did do that kind of stuff. He did bench press post-puberty. He did do things like barbell curls. He also did a hell of a lot of work on his ABCs, on the plyometrics, on bounding. Again, you might say, well, so what? We all do that now. But this was quite revolutionary for a middle distance athlete to be doing that back in the 70s and 80s. So Peter Coe and Seb Coe and people like George Gandy at Loughborough University were ahead of their time in many ways in doing that plyo work, in doing that bounding work. Also, Seb used to do circuit training and stage training, which is not dissimilar to circuit training. That may use household furniture to do stage training. It also tends to mean working one particular exercise through sets before you progress to another. So slightly different to circuit training. Coe had a full healthy diet of all of that stuff to complement his anaerobic running and his aerobic running as well. Hope that makes sense as a philosophy, because now it's over to you. I'm going to give you around about 5 minutes to address this question. And the question is as follows. What modes of sessions, what type of sessions are you going to set to help the young Sebastian Coe cope with the fluctuations in pace of a tactical 800 meters? There he is, pictured losing his first Olympic final, the Moscow Olympic 800 meters final, to his arch rival Steve Ovett. He got it, by his own admission, tactically wrong. But what kind of rep sessions can you set to help Seb cope with a race like that, which was run in something ridiculous like a 54-second opening lap? People, if you remember, were clipping up or tripping on each other's heels, and Steve Ovett brings them home in 50 or 51 seconds. What type of sessions are you gonna set? I can already see 1 or 2 people coming in. Split differentials, Francis. I like that term. Yeah, keep your answers coming. Yeah. So you're on the right lines there with Francis. Yeah. Need this more now that kids today play less than Coe's generation. Good. Pyramid sessions. Cut down reps. Not sure what that is. Les, maybe you can explain a little bit more. Flying 30s. Yeah. Graham's got a differential of a 500 and 300. Yeah. Short recovery reps. Love it. Keep it coming. Now, while you're doing that for 5 minutes, while you're typing away, I'm going to deal with the first 4 questions that some of you had from last week. So keep on typing, keep on thinking. Ignore me if I'm not answering a question that you wanted an answer to, but I'm just going to speak to people that had a specific question while you're doing that for 5 minutes to save time. Yeah, last week, Karen Hill asked us, do you find that you're often battling against pushy parents wanting the wins now? We spoke about, I warned you about us all having to swim against the cultural tide, didn't I? Great point by Karen. What would I do about it? Well, there's no point getting upset about it. We have to accept it for what it is. My view would be to encourage them to get involved, get them doing a coaching assistant badge, try and find a role for them within the sport, keep them busy. Why? Because the more educated they are and the more educated they become, the more likely they are to actively buy into your philosophy. People don't like being told things, particularly pushy parents. So get them to buy into it by making them a stakeholder if you can. Second question was from Phil Hayes. Yeah, Phil, a great point about relative age. Those born in the first quarter have an advantage over those born into the latter part of a year. Scott has done some brilliant work around this for his own youth endurance conference recently, his own youth endurance webinar, where he spoke about how there are early developers, there are late developers, but those evidence is suggesting that the late developers will catch up with the early specializers, and that's showing itself in under 20 and junior results. So there is encouragement there, there is light at the end of the tunnel. What I would say is to take them beyond track and field. Take children, give your athletes a vision from another sport. Yeah. Talk to them about footballers. You know, my late father always used to remind me that most footballers, like Wayne Rooney, that play football for England, they don't actually represent England's schoolboys. Many professional boxers that go on to win a world title, actually, when you look back, they weren't even amateur ABA boxing champions. So I think that by pushing them to well-known examples from beyond track and field, you can still retain their enthusiasm, keep them in the sport. Hope that helps. Third question from Vanessa Hammett. Yeah, she's experienced, Vanessa has, other coaches telling their athletes that they can improve them. We're talking about poaching. Let's call it what it is. Absolutely. So what do we do to try and deal with poaching? Well, we can deal with it the formal route, which is, again, a last resort. We can take it to the coaching committee if we've got faith in that committee at your club. But also before that, what I've seen at a club like Birchfield Harriers recently is coaches attempting to break down traditional boundaries, to break down territoriality. Why not have occasional sessions once every month, once every 6 weeks, where coaches agree to have a joint session and work together? I was listening to a wonderful webinar by Frank Dick the other day, where he was talking about co-opetition, about how, you know, coaches that used to compete with each other are learning to try and cooperate. Google that term, co-opetition. It's a business term. It's a wonderful term. I think it gives you some clues as to the approach you can take to work with other coaches. Very difficult one, though. Fourthly, before we come back to the group task, yeah, many ways in which this is Mike Ellis Martin's question. Yeah, Mike is an optimist, saying, yeah, there are many ways that COVID-19 or the pandemic gives us a chance to really work on things that we often don't do enough of. Mike sees this as an opportunity. Yeah, I'd agree. Let's think about the way in which we learn in terms of, was it Kolb who spoke about learning styles? We are all doers. We're activists. We're the sort of people that get up and go. We get off our backsides and we do things in the sport. But because we're doers, we're less likely to be reflectors or theorists. Now is a great opportunity to develop your skills of reflection, to your skills as a theorist as well. I think it's called the reflective practitioner, isn't it? We can reflect on what we do, and we can get involved in coach education far more, and we can start afresh, having built up our knowledge. So great. I'm preaching to the converted, guys, because you're you know, if the sheer fact that you're listening to this means that you're buying into that philosophy. So I hope that answers the first 4 questions. I've got another 3 to deal with a little bit later on, because there's 2 group tasks. Let's have a look at what you're coming up with. Understanding the athlete, Emma says. Yeah. What are his or her strengths? Yeah, absolutely. Mental strength, scenario planning, elimination races, Simon says. I think is that devil takes the hindmost? Workings and out, 60s to 80s. Elias, good point there. Rachel Burney's got a good one. Yeah. Actually attending the A workshops, an ideal forum to meet others. Any other thoughts about what specific types of sessions that we're going to set Sebco? Yeah, John Clements has said a 30-minute run with fast strides, that they're alactic strides, 5 by 30 meters off a walk. Yeah. Fantastic. Graham Lamb, fantastic, who does fantastic work, Graham, for the Midland Masters. Yeah, race tactic game over 400 meters, easy 200, then a kick at 200. Like that differential. You're onto the right lines. Everybody that's contributed has got the kind of philosophy that Sebco was giving me. The key concepts which underpinned the Coe's approach were surges, differentials, and or injection of paces. Surges, differential, or injectors. Let's have a look at the specific sessions. Yeah, there is Lord Coe at the 2011 European Endurance Conference. He's been interviewed by the late great Dave Sunderland. Dave Sunderland was an athlete that guided Spencer Duval, who's done some brilliant work setting these webinars up. He guided Spencer to World Championships and also the 1996 Atlanta Olympics. Dave sadly passed away back in 2014. Pleasingly, he's got a fantastic book out there, which I'll allude to in a few minutes' time, High Performance Middle Distance Running. He's also got one called High Performance Endurance Running, I think. And he speaks about at least 7 different modes of speed endurance. I've picked the first 4, which I think apply to giving an athlete like a young Sebastian Coe more tactical awareness, more ability to change pace. And they are as follows. Firstly, split intervals or differentials. Secondly, pace injectors. Thirdly, what Dave Sunderland calls pace increases. And fourthly, tired surges. Let's take you through each of those 4 modes of speed endurance, giving you an example, but the times I mention and even the distances aren't relevant to your athlete. You know, the examples that Dave Sunderland uses are about Seb Coe's training. They're about Steve Ovett's training. They're not about your athlete's training. So don't just write these sessions down and for goodness sake try and replicate them. Think about the principle, the philosophy, the spirit of the session. Okay, let's start with split intervals or differentials, probably the most common term that you've got in that thread. Yeah, an example would be an 800 or 1500 runner like Sebastian Coe performing. Let's imagine that this person, a young athlete, is trying to break 4 minutes for the metric mile, 4 minutes for 1500 meters. So the session is 4 400s, yeah, in 55 seconds. So well below the type of pace needed to run a 4-minute 1500. So the first 200 may be run in 29 seconds, and the second 200 differential wise might be say 26 seconds, and then you'd give them a 5 or 6 minute passive walk recovery, almost a full recovery in between. So can you see how that's a very simple way of introducing a bog standard interval or differential within a rep itself? The strength of that type of session, it's great at simulating slower championship races like the Moscow Olympic 800 meter final, where the second half of the race is invariably quicker than the first half. Again, the weaknesses of it is that it doesn't engender economy of effort. You're not necessarily going to run a PB if you're running that level of differential. But that's your basic starting point, a split interval or a differential. Secondly, what's a pace injector then? Well, let's take a bog standard session. Again, it doesn't matter. Let's call it 3 600s. Forget the times. But again, we could have a junior athlete, a middle distance athlete, running the first 200 meters in 30 seconds, the second 200 meters in 28 seconds, and then reverting back to the third 200 in 30 seconds. So the injection comes in the middle of the rep. Again, the great part of that is it simulates the tactical battles characteristic of mid-race surges. So if an athlete switches off mentally in the middle of a race, that pace injector is a great way of dealing with it. Remember that Seb Coe in that Moscow Olympic 800 meter final, by his own admission, really lost touch in the third 200 meters, the third part of the race, yeah? it was down the back straight for the penultimate time that he began to lose touch with the leaders, Kirov and Steve Ovett. So think about pace injectors. Third one is pace increases. Quite simply, let's take 600 meters again. So we run this time, the first 200 meters in 30 seconds, the second in 28, and then we kick again and we run a 26. Yeah, that's almost like a progression run within a rep, isn't it? It's what we'd call a progression run if we were doing it round a park or down a canal. Again, once again, it's great at simulating slower championship races. Again, where the second half of races are invariably quicker than the first half. Slightly different to the first two modes. Final mode of speed endurance to help us tactically, tired surges. Again, I think I'm going to throw you back to what Graham Lamb said there. An easy 200 Graham was talking about. I like what Graham's put there, because let's take 600 meters here. The first 300 meters we might run in 45 seconds. And then, as Graham was alluding to in the thread, you've got a cruise element. The next 100 meters isn't timed. It's a cruise element. And then you push again, the last 200 meters even harder, and you run that in 28 seconds. So tired surges help the athlete cope with a fast and furious opening lap before the race settles in the middle stages, and then help you to kick on again. So don't forget that this mode of speed endurance can give you a crude element. So forget the sessions, forget the fact that it's 600s, forget the fact that it's 45 seconds. Is this giving you a way of moving beyond just talking about speed work? I hate it when coaches just say speed work. Doesn't mean anything. And when we talk about speed endurance work and work in the lactate energy system, we still need to be far more specific about what sorts of repetitions we're doing. Okay, that is your first 4 modes of speed endurance. Final question this evening, before I go to the next 3 questions that I'm going to answer as you're doing this. Again, want to see people using the thread. I want to see people answering this question. We've dealt with helping Seb to do the double then at Moscow. We've dealt with any tactical deficiencies, partly through, yes, it might be mental, as some of you quite rightly said, but partly through those sessions which are about differentials or about surges or about injection. How can we help a young Seb run even more quickly than he did? Let's imagine that we want him to break, I don't know, what did he do? 141.7 for 800. Let's get him running 140. 347 for a mile, I think he ran. Let's get him running 345. How can you help a young Sebastian Coe to progress to lowering his own world records? What sorts of sessions are you now going to suggest? You can't reiterate what we've just been through. Yeah, you've got those in your bank. You've got those in your piggy bank. Can you think of 2 or 3 different types of repetition session that we can get him doing? So I want to see some comments coming on. I can see at least 4 or 5 people are typing now. You've got a good 5 minutes to do that. Before I come back to the thread, I'm going to now finish off by talking about the last 3 questions that you guys asked me last week. Yeah, question number 5 that we had. Who was this from? That was from Nick Crawford. Hello, Nick, if you're there. Nick asked us, I'm really struggling with my athletes, especially boys not doing what they're set and wanting to do more. Definitely a competitive nature. And Nick is blaming it there on Strava. Well, my answer to that is you're not going to change Strava, and you're not even going to change, whether it's males or females, you're not going to change the competitive nature of young athletes. So embrace it, harness it, but channel it in a slightly different direction. Why not set them competitions around developing their ABCs? Well, let them compete on who is the most flexible one week or who is the most coordinated. Give a prize for the best drill during a warm-up or the best stretch during a cool-down. So learn that they can compete with each other, but not just to do with times or splits or volume of training. So take it away from Strava if you can, but you're never going to get rid of the competitive element. Question 6, Kay Thorburns asked this one. I'd love to know how you'd approach training differently for an 800 meters for a middle distance female who is under 15 or under 17 compared to a multi-eventer for the 800 meters. Well, quite simply, I think it's fair to say that multi-eventers will be restricted with the amount of volume or aerobic work that they can do. Doesn't mean they don't work aerobically, but they're not going to be running 30, 40, 50 miles a week. Yeah, they won't have the time to do that. So my suggestion would be to think about the difference between an 800, 1500 type middle distance runner, or on the other hand, a 400 to 800 type runner. I would work that young athlete, that young middle distance female athlete, as a 400, 800 type runner. I'd be looking at the work of somebody like Jenny Meadows, who we covered in previous weeks. Remember how Jenny started as a 300-meter runner, then progressed to the 400, then became a kind of 800-meter runner. Not massively aerobically based, Jenny wasn't. So I'd be looking at somebody like her, and I'd be sort of saying, well, look, if you can run a fast 200 as part of your multi-events, you've got the fast twitch muscle fibers to get you around an 800. So I'd be approaching the 800 from a speed base rather than an endurance base. So yes, you need the aerobics, but they'll come from other things other than running. Final question. Was it from Saran Bradley, I think, from my club, South Derbyshire. Hello, if you're there. An indoor circuit. How long should we work an athlete for? Well, I would say if it's aerobically based and you want an aerobic benefit, then really 20 minutes should be sufficient if it's aerobically based. However, if you want, you can make the circuit shorter if you're developing the lactate system far more. If it's more high intensity, if the recoveries between the exercises are kept to a minimum and you're working people really, really hard, it could be a lot less than 20 minutes. So rather than saying how long in volume terms or time terms should a circuit be, I would be thinking about how many sets should it be? What's the length of recovery rather than the total volume of the session? But if it's more than 20 minutes, I'd be saying, where can you go in terms of progressive overload? Where can you go? You know, you know, the wonderful stuff online that I'd encourage you to look at that James T has been doing, a Cardiff-based coach. Google it. It's on the British Milers Club website as well. Wonderful stuff around circuits. That tends to be around about 30 minutes, and that's a senior athlete or a mature masters athlete now taking some senior athletes through a circuit. 30 minutes is fine for them, so 20 minutes will be fine for a junior. Okay, those are your questions answered. We did have another fantastic question from Richard Massey, which really is beyond the control of coaches. Richard was asking about competitions and whether certain competitions could be scrapped or amended or abandoned for young athletes because of the performance pressure that it's putting young athletes on. That's out of our control, but we can manage upward through people like Scott Grace and other people in the sport, people like Spencer, who will be feeding that back. But that's a decision for others to make, isn't it? Whether we enter our athletes for all of the competitions is under our control to a degree as a coach, though, isn't it? Okay, let's see what I hope people have been coming up with. Yeah, partner runs, that'll be K. Yeah, I've just answered your question. One runs hard, one way around the course, the other the opposite way at a recovery pace. That's a kind of pile off, isn't it? Yeah, a kind of pile off. Work ins and outs, 60s to 80s. What else have we got? Let's move down a little bit. Intervals with long recoveries. Yeah, definitely long passive recoveries, Darren. Bruce has got 3 sets of 400 meters with a 60-second recovery, then 200 meters with 6 minutes recovery, 5% faster than target pace. Certainly agree that you need to run faster than your race pace. Francis says developing Seb's speed reserve. So looking at PBs over 100, 200 or 400 meters. Phil Hayes, another good point, Phil. Small volume of shallow downhills with the emphasis on leg speed. Yeah, downhill running on grass, definitely for cadence, for stride length, for turnover. That's fantastic. Emma says all sessions linked with drills. That's fine, yeah. Grace has agreed with that about posture. Fantastically well-balanced athlete. Karen has suggested 4x300s with a long recovery. I'm glad you're all suggesting long passive modes of recovery because that's more characteristic of speed endurance and not aerobic endurance or interval work. Yeah, some great answers there. I think you've had your 5 minutes. The sessions which Dave Sunderland would recommend or call are the following. There's 3 more to add to the 4 that you've already got. Quality repetitions, high intensity repetitions. And the other notion that Dave would talk about is specificity. Again, you're all getting that theme there. Quality, high intensity, specificity. It links to those core concepts, doesn't it? So quality repetitions, high intensity repetitions, and event specific repetitions. Let's move through them one by one. What is a quality repetition? Well, it could be a 1500 meter runner who does a session. It's just 2 by 1K, 2 by 1,000 meters. You're allowing that athlete a complete recovery in between. It might be 10 or 15 minutes in between. That's great at simulating race pace specificity. You're going to run that at your 1500 pace, aren't you? But with every strength of this session, there's a weakness. I remember Bud Buldaro, who I had the pleasure of working with for several years over at Birmingham, once said to me, "But Matt, when did you ever see an athlete stand still in the middle of a race?" So remember, the longer the passive recovery, the longer the walk recovery or complete recovery, some people would argue it's not training you to keep going, that it's losing that aerobic component. But there is a place for quality reps. Great at simulating race pace specificity. High intensity repetitions. Well, what's the difference there? Well, we tend to be classifying this sort of work into sets. Here we've got 2 sets of 3 by 200 meters. The key is it's very short repetitions, remarkably short. 20 seconds it could be, 30 seconds between the reps, but a long recovery, a long passive recovery of walking up to say 8 minutes or 10 minutes between sets. So high intensity repetitions, put them into sets, keep the recovery between the reps short, but the recovery between the sets long. That's your variable there. Yeah. Again, that engenders consistency of fast pace. But the weakness is you can only use this sort of session at certain points of the periodization cycle. You know, too much prolonged use of this will result in loss of form and potential injury. So you've got to be clever about when in the pre-competition and competition phase of the periodization cycle you use it. Overuse it and you'll burn your athlete. And finally, event-specific repetitions to be used as you move into the competition phase of the periodization cycle. The session on the left was taken by Dave Sundin, and I believe it's a Steve Ovett session. Why? Because Ovett had a world record of 3:30 for 1500 meters. Let's take that as an example. Again, we put it into sets. The golden rule of an event-specific repetition session is that each set always adds up to the race distance, but the second set reps are always shorter than the first. Sounds like a bit gobbledygook. Let me give you an example using Steve Ovett. Here's a Steve Ovett session. Okay, a 3:30 runner, or somebody capable as Ovett was of running 3:30 for 1500 meters as a senior athlete, can run, say, the first set will be, say, 500 meters at 70 seconds, 1 minute recovery, 700 meters in 98 seconds, 30 seconds recovery, and then 300 meters at 42 seconds, and then a complete recovery. And the second set again adds up to 1500 meters, as does the first, but it's 5 by 300 meters at 42 seconds. So you're running constantly at your event specific target pace. Yeah, all of those reps, whatever the distance, whatever the recovery, are run for Ovett at his race pace. Yeah, that makes sense. Useful for fine tuning, aren't they? Yeah. But again, if you overuse a session like that, it can risk excessive fatigue and your athlete will lose form and potentially get injured. Okay. Key take-homes then, as we come towards the last 5 minutes or so, and I'm still looking for the questions. Please do put your questions in the thread. If we can't answer them in the next 5 minutes, I'll certainly tag them on. My answers, Scott's answers, Spencer Duval's answers to whatever you're asking in the thread. Key take-homes from this course. These are questions for you to really reflect on. Number 1, know your own philosophy of long-term athlete development. Have a plan, have a vision, have a philosophy. Be like one of the great coaches, like a Lydiard or a Peter Coe or a Cerruti. Have a philosophy, not just a list of sessions. Secondly, consider whether your approach engenders early or late specialization. Be prepared to swim or continue to swim against that tide in the right way. Thirdly, How do we swim against the tide? We'll use case studies to help your athlete visualize their future. Get them researching athletes like Jenny Meadows, Jakob Ingebrigtsen, Peter Snell, who we mentioned last week, and Seb Coe. Get them finding out who Seb Coe was. Saddest thing when I interviewed Seb Coe last summer was he said he didn't think anybody would remember that he was an athlete. He just thought the kids of today remembered him for London 2012. How sad is that? You know, bring these athletes alive and bring the late specialization aspect of their career alive through YouTube. Yeah. Know your history, get your athletes to be historians. Fourthly, avoid a fixation on training according to chronological age. We've talked in these 3 sessions about biological age, relative age, training age, developmental age, psychology as well, definitely. Fifthly, never lose sight of periodization, even, that should say, during the pandemic. Yet always have a plan, always have a goal, and it's the military, they say it, critical pathway analysis. Start with a goal and work backwards. Sixthly, have a framework for classifying the physical exercise undertaken during the pandemic. Have your own triangle, have your own pyramid. Be able to put different eggs in different baskets at certain times. No, but have a framework. Scaffold your training, your coaching. And seventhly, let's move on to tonight. Never just talk about speed work. Be prepared to critically disaggregate the notion of speed endurance. And finally, be aware of which modes or types of speed endurance work, facilitate even pace running, and which lean towards developing tactical versatility. Know which sessions you're picking and why you're picking them. You've got to be able to have the brains to progress a session and also to regress a session as well. Some more questions coming in. Can you coach mental strength and willpower? That's a question, isn't it? To a degree, some people would argue it's innate, but I certainly believe that nurture has a role there, Keith. Somebody's done a Lydiard training course. We may be able to get some more stuff out on Lydiard through these webinars in the future. I'm not going to say too much about that, but we have something in mind about out and back running, Grace, for you. So keep logging on to the England webinars. They are likely to evolve all over the summer. Phil wants to know about the Lydiard course. I'm not here to sell that. What I will leave you with is some references and further reading. Again, most of these articles I can either send you or they're off the Athletics Weekly website. If it's a British Milers Club publication, I'll be able to send it you. If you want to find out about multi-tier or multi-pace training, Frank Horwell is the guy to start with. I'm not saying follow his system, but it gives you a clue. If you want to find out about high intensity training, some work that I did with a national trainer called Jamie French on hitting the target, hitting a high, hitting your training. Again, have a look on the Athletics Weekly website for those. Seb Coe's training. Yeah, I've written some stuff for the British Milers Club and Athletics Weekly on Seb Coe's training, his philosophy, listing some of his sessions, but getting to grips with the philosophy. If you want to get involved in or know more about Peter Coe, who coached Seb, look for the work of Jeff James, who is pretty much an expert on people like Peter Coe and Harry Wilson. He will talk you through some of the books that Peter Coe wrote. I can hook you up with Jeff. He's a former England team manager and area coach mentor. And I must recommend and highly credit Dave Sunderland's work, the late, great Dave Sunderland, who coached Spencer. High Performance Middle Distance Running. Yeah, it was published in 2005. Get yourself a copy. I'm not on commission or anything, but it's as relevant today as it was back in 2005. Read a little bit more about those 7 modes of speed endurance that we've been talking about. Hope I've answered your questions. We've got more questions coming in about pushy parents, things like that. And we will get back to you as soon as we can. But thanks for logging in. Thanks for your feedback. I'll now pass you back to Scott. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Once again, brilliant session this week. Really appreciate it. I think that wrapped up the last 3 weeks really nicely. I've been blown away by just reading like all the sharing a good practice and the sessions, etc., by all the coaches. And to be honest, if I had dialed in and I was looking at this, I'd be so excited about the amount of different variations of shared practice. So thank you, everybody, for such a great amount of contribution. I know Matt has served as a brilliant vehicle to stimulate the discussion and people sharing good practice. And what I'd be really eager to get in terms of feedback from yourselves, whether it's a direct email to myself or England Athletics, is what else can we do for you as coaches? Is this the vehicle? Is it about more webinars, more opportunity to share comments, share good practice with each other, sharing sessions? Because as I say, I've been blown away by the stuff going down the side. So keep it coming in. Any feedback, any sort of requests you can send to England Athletics. It'd be really, really grateful, because we want to support coaches as much as we can in these challenging times. We've got the Athletics at Home section on our website, so please keep on visiting that. We've also got Athletics Hub, where you can get loads and loads of great videos and resources. So again, please visit that. And whilst Matt was presenting, I just grabbed a book off the shelf, and I'd wanted to share this with you just to wrap up sort of Matt's last 3 sessions. A book by Peter Matthews called Who's Who of British Athletics, going back to 1989. Seb Coe's PB in 1971 was 2:08 for the 800 meters as a 15-year-old, and he didn't drop under 150 until he was in it, like 20 years old. I find that mind-blowing, considering the man ran a sub 142. But it just goes to show somebody who we all regard as a legend of middle distance running didn't peak young. He peaked later on, and he was a September baby. So I think it's a good message to share with a lot of athletes. I know many of you have mentioned Seb Coe. Maybe a little bit more of a modern example would be great, but he's still an example of somebody who went from a 2:08 as a 15-year-old to breaking the world record, I believe in his mid-20s, maybe 25. So fantastic conversations been going on in terms of the message board. Keep them going. Hopefully, when we get back on the track, we'll be stronger, more knowledgeable, more confident coaches, and we would have developed a much, much stronger culture of sharing good practice. So keep it going. Send any feedback you've got in, and we'll get Matt to filter through all the questions. But have a great evening. Hope you had a great Easter. Stay safe, everybody, and keep on sharing that good practice. Take care. Thanks to all.